Chapter 1. The Alpha's Cage. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of fear and damp stone. Caius stood tall, a granite statue carved from pure command, and the silence of the assembly swallowed the morning light. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't push the feeling of a hollow ache deep in his chest. A young male, shoulders hunched, awaited judgment for daring to challenge a patrol boundary near the western edge. Caius's voice was a low, resonant baritone, a sound built to cut through the din of a full-moon hunt, but used now only for cold law. "You knew the line, Rorik." Rorik's eyes, pale gold in the gloom, flickered up, wide with terror. "Alpha, I was only—" Silence. The word was a single, perfect blade of ice. Truth be told, Caius didn't enjoy this, but duty was the cage he had built for himself 10 years ago. He had to be this way, cold and absolute, because any crack in his control, any whisper of vulnerability, risked the entire pack. He remembered a time when he had ruled with warmth, but that man, that weak, loving fool, had almost destroyed his bloodline. Never again. 2 weeks on border patrol. Double rotation, Caius declared. And a moon's cycle of fasting. Learn that the law protects you. It is not an invitation to risk. Rorik nodded mutely, gratitude mingling with relief on his face. Caius watched him retreat. The pack shifted, a quiet rustling of furs and muscle, before settling back into expectant stillness. They waited for more, but there was nothing. The lesson was complete. After that, Caius dismissed them with a sharp nod, his movement economical, his gaze sweeping the territory not to see his pack, but to look for signs of a threat that was always lurking just beyond the treeline. Why did that past weakness almost destroy his bloodline? What choice cost him the ability to rule with warmth? On the other hand, Caius's immense, self-imposed control was his weakness, because it left no room for the necessary chaos of genuine connection or feeling. He felt his own pack's respect, yes, but no intimacy. "It's necessary," he told himself, the mantra a familiar thrum in his veins. Isolation is safe. As the pack dispersed, following the invisible lines of hierarchy, Caius turned toward his den. The air stirred slightly, carrying a scent, sharp, metallic, and distinctly foreign. It was gone almost instantly, as if pulled by a string into the deeper shadows. What was that? What followed was a quiet search of the assembly clearing. Caius crouched, his fingers brushing the stone ground. He found nothing, but his instinct surged, a tight, cold clench in his gut that only happened when a deep, fundamental rule of their world had been broken. Something silent and shadowed had been here, moving with a cunning that surpassed any of his own trackers. A question directed at the viewer/listener. How often do we mistake absolute control for true strength? And just like that, everything changed, even though the morning sunlight was exactly the same. The foreign presence, silent, cunning, watching, felt like a direct challenge to the very foundation of his alpha rule. He had to move before the threat solidified, but first, he needed more than a ghost of a scent. He needed eyes outside the pack. That was a risk because those eyes often came with a price. Chapter 2. The Taste of Treason. Instead of returning to his den, Caius followed the vague, troubling trail to the territorial periphery, where the wilderness scraped against the neglected outskirts of a nearby human town. He shifted into his human form, massive, scarred but wearing clothes, the transition to a tight, burning discipline of muscle and bone. He kept his wolf close, a low, golden-eyed hum beneath his skin. He arrived at the designated spot, an abandoned shack used only for illicit meetings with those who value neutrality over allegiance. Meanwhile, a man named Silas, a sniveling former tracker from a defunct southern pack, was already waiting, vibrating with anxiety like a plucked string. "Alpha Caius." Silas bowed so low his nose nearly scraped the dirt. "Speak," Caius commanded, his voice deliberately flat, letting the subtext of authority fill the silence. He didn't trust Silas, because Silas was a rat who followed the biggest scent of cheese, yet the man had eyes in places Caius couldn't risk placing his own. Silas licked his lips. "It's Corinne." Alpha Corinne. He's been active. Not just near your borders, but out there. He gestured vaguely toward the human side. His scouts are everywhere. They're looking for something specific. Something powerful.
Assignature.
Caius narrowed his eyes. Corinne is always looking for power. That is standard aggression. Tell me something I cannot anticipate. Not only that, Silas hesitated, glancing nervously at the dense shadows of the woods. They're checking every human town on the border that's had disruption. Small things. Strange power outages, a dog mutilated, maybe a broken wall at a school. Caius felt a small, sharp jolt in his chest, like a sudden pressure drop. Disruption. School. It was the kind of collateral damage an early, uncontrolled shift might cause. This is what I learned from one of his trackers, Silas whispered, pulling a crumpled item from his pocket. It was a simple child's drawing, crayon scribbled onto construction paper. It showed a sun, a stick figure, and a vaguely wolf-shaped shadow. They found this near a suburban park near the human town. Corinne's men tossed it, but their scent lingered on it. They said it was unnatural. Caius took the paper. His large, callous thumb accidentally smeared the crayon sun. As the wind shifted, a faint, sweet scent rose from the paper, buried beneath the human town smells and Silas's fear. It was familiar, ancient, and undeniable. It was the scent of Alara and the 10 years of deliberate isolation he had forced them into. Plot twist / subhook. The child's name written in the corner of the drawing, in careful block letters, was the name Orion. Caius's breath hitched. He had failed. His sacrifice, his past decision to let them live in the silent safety of the human world, had just been breached. Because of that, his decade-long guilt hit him like a physical blow. Why hadn't he tracked them closer? Why hadn't he broken his own damned rules? He had mistaken absence for protection. "You have given me something new," Caius said, his voice now dangerously low, demanding attention.
Go. And do not speak of the scent.
Not to anyone. Ever. That's why Silas needed no further prompting. He scrambled away, disappearing into the underbrush, leaving Caius alone with a crayon drawing and the horrifying realization that his son, Orion, was in the path of a rival alpha. The external threat was now a screaming, raw, internal wound. He crushed the paper in his fist, its texture rough against his palm. He couldn't afford to compartmentalize anymore. Chapter 3. Kinfire. By the time Caius reached his den, the world felt wrong. The stone walls, usually comforting and cool, pressed in on him. He slammed the heavy wooden door shut, cutting off the noise of the pack, their respect, their needs, their demands. He needed silence to think, because the silence was the only place he could hear the ghost of his past, the ghost of Alara. He dropped the crumpled drawing onto his sleeping furs. Orion, a name he hadn't spoken aloud since it was an unspoken promise between him and Alara. What does he look like? Does he have her laugh? These were questions the burdened leader wasn't allowed to ask. The only questions allowed were, is the bloodline safe? Is the pack secure? But then, the scent of Orion, faint, sweet, and metallic, overpowered the scent of pine and moss in the den. Caius paced the small space like a caged animal. He ran a massive hand over his scarred temple. He felt it, clear as day, the decades of duty pressing down on him. The reason he had let her walk away. He had feared his own weakness, his capacity to love so fiercely that it might cloud his judgment. He had told himself that letting Alara raise Orion far from the pack politics was the ultimate act of protection, because only he knew the terrible price of their unique lineage. A short story of guilt. He remembered the last time he'd seen her. A decade ago, in this very den. Her eyes were hard, green ice. "You chose the pack, Caius. You chose the power," she had said, her voice trembling. He hadn't defended himself because she was right. He had chosen order over his heart, thinking the sacrifice was noble. He only watched her walk away, and that silence had been his longest, deepest penance. How could one choice inflict so much pain over so many years? As the truth unraveled, his controlled dread morphed into a true, gut-wrenching panic. The child was vulnerable. His child was the target. Without warning, a scent hit the den that made his knees buckle. It wasn't the sweet metallic trace from the paper. This was raw power, uncontrolled, ozone-thick, and volatile. It was pure, unadulterated kinfire. It was the smell of a first shift, a terrible, desperate eruption of the wolf when the human shell was too fragile to hold it. It was loud, it was violent, and it was coming from the direction of the human town. Caius didn't fight the change. His clothes ripped as his body swelled, tendons snapping taut, bones grinding and reforming. The transformation was agonizing, a baptism by fire he usually controlled to the point of silence, but this time, the urgency was too great.
Growl.
The sound ripped from his throat, a deep, rumbling assertion of alpha fear. At that moment, duty and family violently collided. The controlled, measured alpha was gone. Only the terrifyingly powerful wolf remained, driven by the purest animal instinct, protect the vulnerable blood. As fire bloomed beneath his skin, Caius launched himself against the heavy door, shattering the wood. His self-imposed isolation was over. The hunt had begun. He would find Alara, because only together could they extinguish this volatile kinfire. His massive form cleared the territorial line, plunging into the shadows of the suburbs, driven by the scent of chaos and the terrible knowledge that she was there, running from the life he had forced her to save. Chapter 4. The Centrail. The massive, iron-gray wolf that was Caius moved with a speed that blurred the edges of the mundane world. One leap carried him over a 6-foot fence, the next landed him silently in a patch of manicured petunias. As the wind shifted, the sickening, coppery smell of chaos mixed with the lingering, frantic scent of Alara's fear. She's close. Too close to the humans. He found the scene of the inciting incident on a quiet, tree-lined street. A garage door was buckled inward, twisted like tin foil, and a section of vinyl siding on the house looked singed. What followed was a sweep of the perimeter. Caius dropped to his belly, analyzing the ground. He saw small, uneven prints, not human, not fully wolf, the signature of a partial, agonizing shift. The boy is chaos, Caius thought, a sharp, cold wedge of professional judgment cutting through his panic. This wasn't just latent power, it was a detonation. But then, he caught the secondary scent trail. Several sets of foreign paws, Corinne's scouts, had been here. They were disciplined, fast, and now they were tracking the boy, too. At the same time, a siren wailed in the distance, a thin, pathetic sound that was meaningless against the gravity of the supernatural crisis unfolding. Caius realized the high stakes. The boy was uncontrollable, Corinne was a predator, and the human world was waking up. Because of that, his pace quickened. This was no longer a hunt, but a race. He followed the faint, fading trail of Alara's familiar wood smoke and musk mixed with the sun's frightening power. It led away from the destruction, toward the cover of a strip of deep woods bordering his own protected territory. Not only that, the air itself felt charged. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car horn, felt like a judgment on his failure to secure them years ago. In the quiet that followed a frantic dash across a commuter parking lot, Caius located a final, crucial piece of evidence where Alara must have paused to shift or change the boy. Tucked beneath the roots of an oak tree, he found a small, dark piece of fabric, a fragment of a familiar, simple tunic Alara used to wear when she wanted to feel close to the pack, even when she'd left. He nudged it with his muzzle, the scent filling him, her resilience, her desperation. She's running, but she's guiding him toward my border. She felt it, clear as day, that she needed the cover of his wildlands, the territory he commanded. As the truth unraveled, a different kind of anguish hit Caius, a deep, protective fury that Alara had been forced to face this primal terror alone, for a decade, because of his choice. He had betrayed her trust, and now their son was paying the price. He couldn't fail them again. Just like that, everything changed from strategic tracking to a desperate, singular focus. The trail led straight to the shadowed wilderness border, the agreed-upon, silent line he hadn't crossed since she left. He broke into a dead run, knowing the confrontation wasn't just with Corinne anymore. It was with his past. Chapter 5. The Reluctant Meeting. Caius reached the hollow just as the sun crested the trees, piercing the mist with yellow spears. In the span of a breath, he heard the whimpers, a sound that sliced through his alpha discipline like glass. There, huddled beneath the massive canopy of an ancient oak, were Alara and Orion. He shifted immediately, the sudden reversion to human form leaving him momentarily dizzy and exposed, his gaze fixed on them. Alara, hair wild and face streaked with dirt, was trying to hold a small, trembling Orion, whose skin was mottled with patchy fur, a horrific, uncontrolled state. Alara looked up, her green eyes blazing with exhaustion and 10 years of stored-up rage. She didn't look relieved. She looked betrayed again. "You took your time, Alpha," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Caius ignored the sting.
The boy.
"What have you tried?" "I tried everything you never had to try," she spat, pulling Orion closer. "Herbal control, meditation, suppressing my own scent. It's too much, Caius. He's too volatile. He's kinfire." Despite that agonizing truth, Caius felt a powerful surge of painful relief just seeing her alive, quickly followed by the defensive resentment of old hurt. "She left me with the pack," he reminded himself. "She chose isolation." "I warned you," he said, his voice clipped, letting duty cloak the emotion. "This is alpha blood. Untrained, it's a weapon. You can't handle it alone, Alara. You ran from the solution." "The solution was you," she cried, the tears now thick in her voice. "Your pack rules. Your sacrifice. You watched me walk away because it was convenient for your duty. You think I need your pack's help now? I need training." She shoved the trembling Orion toward him. The moment their eyes locked, Caius could sense the terrifying, erratic energy pulsing beneath his son's small skin. It felt like holding a live grenade. A father's shock. Orion looked nothing like the soft baby Caius remembered. He was a scared, skinny boy with his mother's fiercely angled chin and eyes that were now oscillating rapidly between human brown and wolf gold. Caius reached out, his hand enveloping the boy's tiny, fur-mottled shoulder. As the bond pulsed, an involuntary connection only an alpha and his direct progeny shared, Caius felt the son's fear, sharp and immediate, mirroring his own desperation. Alara's refusal to trust him was the secondary, personal conflict threatening to consume him because her dismissal of his power felt like a dismissal of the sacrifice he'd made. Maybe it was fate that brought them back together, but it felt more like a catastrophe. Caius had to break through her resentment. Chapter 6. A Necessary Lie. Caius held his son, feeling the terrifying tremor of his out-of-control shift. The boy was overheating, his muscles spasming. Before either could speak, Caius released a deep, focused wave of alpha command. It wasn't a roar, but a low, vibrating chord of pure, controlled power that radiated through his hand, straight into Orion's erratic energy. The effect was immediate. The patchy fur receded. Orion whimpered once more, but his trembling slowed. His eyes steadied, shifting back to the brown of a scared human child. The ozone scent dissipated, replaced by the normal smells of pine and blood. Alara watched, her face pale, the rage in her eyes replaced by reluctant awe. She didn't know what scared her more, Corinne's scouts or Caius's chilling, absolute control. "You see," Caius said, his voice still tightly controlled, withdrawing his hand. "That is alpha control, the antidote to chaos. Your solitude was always destined to fail, because only alpha blood can contain this kind of power." "It doesn't change what you did," Alara whispered, grief making her voice harsh. "I didn't choose the pack over you," Caius countered, letting a sliver of raw, honest pain pierce his alpha facade. "I chose the world over the bloodline, believing a life hidden was safer than a life of war. I was wrong." He looked at the trembling Orion. Now, Corinne knows the boy's signature. He felt that surge. He knows the power is here, volatile and unique. With every heartbeat, the tension between them eased, replaced by the crushing weight of their shared danger. Corinne's scouts are already tracking the residual scent of that shift, Caius explained, his tone shifting entirely to strategy. If we stay here, we all die, and he uses Orion's blood to breed his own weapons. What do you need? Alara asked, her voice stripped bare of emotion, now purely tactical.
Unity.
Silence. And your knowledge of the human towns for our supply runs. We must retreat into the shadowed wilderness. My pack territory is the only place we can hide him because my people recognize the boundaries of the threat. As the silence stretched, Alara looked at Orion, then back at Caius. She inhaled deeply, her chest aching.
Fine.
For him, she agreed, the acceptance of their fate hanging heavy in the air. But I don't trust you, Caius. Not yet. Trust is not required, he said, meeting her eyes, the familiar warmth of his love buried beneath the cold necessity of his new goal. Only cooperation. Without another word, Caius shifted back to his wolf form, a massive, silent, terrifying gray shadow. Alara picked up Orion, settling him on his back. As if the forest watched, they plunged deep into the wilderness, moving as one unit driven by opposite forces, her maternal will, his desperate duty. The Alpha's control had broken the tension, locking them into a brutal, dangerous alliance. The first step into the new reality had begun. Chapter 7. The Training Failure. They had been in the shadowed wilderness border for 3 days. Come morning, Caius felt the familiar weight of exhaustion, but this time it wasn't from battle, it was from the relentless, quiet tension of Alara's presence and the volatile presence of Orion. He had settled them in a secured cave system, a place only the Alpha knew, because his pack's loyalty was currently suspect. Caius watched Orion, who sat hunched, carving aimlessly into a piece of bark. The boy was fragile, scarred by the first shift. Caius had to establish control, and fast. Again, Caius commanded, his voice firm, echoing off the stone walls. Focus on the anchor. The center of your body. Imagine the power as cold water, not fire. Hold it there. Orion whimpered, shaking his head. It hurts, Dad. It feels hot. Caius knelt, placing a firm, but careful hand on the boy's shoulder. Pain is irrelevant. Control is everything. You cannot afford to feel. What followed was another attempt at the basic control exercise. Orion closed his eyes, his breathing stuttering. He tried hard. Caius felt the small, desperate flicker of effort through their pack bond, but instead of cold water, the power burst out like a geyser. A small, nearby sapling instantly withered, its leaves curling into black flakes. The air snapped with residual energy. Orion burst into tears, terrified. I can't. You will. Caius retorted, the frustration boiling over. He was failing. His decades of discipline, his ability to force the wolf into submission, meant nothing to this nascent, unique power. Instead of moving to comfort Orion, Caius turned away, running a hand through his short hair. That was Alara's job, the softening, the understanding.
He was the force, the wall.
Before she could move, Alara stepped in front of Caius, shielding Orion with her own body. Her eyes, usually a defensive green, were sharp with maternal fury. Stop it, Caius. You're crushing him, she said, her voice low and dangerous. He's not a soldier. He's 10 years old. You are treating him like a subordinate, not a son. Caius glared at her, meeting her challenge head-on. My method keeps him alive, because only absolute control stops the kinfire. Your human softness will get him killed, and your alpha discipline will make him hate himself before Corinne even finds us, she countered. You chose power over connection once, and look where it got us. He doesn't need a cold alpha, he needs a father who understands why it's fire, not water. You don't know how to do that. In that moment, her words cut deeper than any blade. Caius felt the raw, undeniable guilt. She was right. He only knew how to command, not to nurture. Even so, Her criticism felt like an irritating challenge to his authority, fueling a sudden, unwanted tension between them. As the tension broke, Caius noticed something far more unsettling than their argument. A faint, foreign scent, a mix of stale smoke and damp fur, drifting into the clearing, bypassing the usual pack markers. It was distant but precise.
A non-pack tracker.
Corinne had found them, or at least the remnants of their trail. The scent was getting stronger, fast. "We stop," Caius said abruptly, the command snapping the air. He looked at Alara, his eyes narrowed, the fear for Orion replacing his frustration. "Your softness will have to wait. We have company." Chapter 8. The Shadowed Alliance. "Corinne isn't just a rival, he's a snake," Caius stated, his body language taut as he knelt beside Alara on the damp ridge overlooking the territory. The scent of the foreign tracker was now unmistakable, moving cautiously through the lower woods. Alara was quiet, focused on the brush line, her tension palpable. "Tell me why he wants Orion." Caius hesitated. Still, he knew this information was necessary because their survival depended on her understanding the depth of the enemy. Corinne believes his pack has the oldest right to the rarest bloodlines. His pack is founded on the idea of purifying power, harnessing the unpredictable. He's been breeding for a signature like Orion's for a generation. That chaotic, unmatched strength, that's his ultimate goal. More importantly, Caius knew he had to address the why of his failure. He gestured toward his territory, the lines running deep into the forest floor. "Corinne and I have been rivals since we were young. He sees my stability as weakness. He tried to lure my pack members away years ago, promising them raw power and freedom from alpha control, the same control you hate." Alara finally turned, her gaze piercing. "Is that why you let me leave?" To cut off a weakness Corinne could exploit. Caius met her gaze without flinching, but his jaw tightened. "I let you leave because I thought your isolation would keep the boy below his radar.
It was a mistake."
I underestimated his reach and his ambition." He felt it, clear as day, the bitter taste of guilt. As the silence stretched, a thin, cold sound echoed from the woods below, a sharp, almost mechanical click. The air instantly thickened. "They're here," Alara whispered, her hand moving instinctively toward a length of heavy branch she had fashioned into a weapon. Caius nodded, his wolf surging beneath his skin, demanding transformation. "Scouting party. Testing the boundaries. This is our first real fight together, Alara. We need to look seamless. We need to survive it, because showing any vulnerability now will invite the full assault." In that moment, a sudden, primal surge of protective pride washed over Caius. Seeing Alara ready to fight, not run, acknowledged the fighter he had always known her to be. The shared danger was, ironically, the only thing dissolving the decade of distance. "Stay close to Orion. Protect the boy. I will draw them," Caius commanded, his voice rumbling, already beginning to shift. But then, Alara gripped his arm, her eyes wide with a strategic intensity that mirrored his own. "No, Alpha," she countered, her voice shaking slightly, but holding steady. "We strike them now. 2 massive wolves will just confirm the value of our territory. 1 massive wolf and a silent, fast human tracker is unpredictable. We hit them before they signal the main force." Caius stared at her, caught between command and the shocking, effective logic of her argument. She was right. Chapter 9. The Primal Synchronicity. Caius transformed fully, his great gray form, a symbol of disciplined power, exploding onto the forest floor. Without thinking, he launched himself at the nearest shadow. The scouting party, 3 large, dark wolves loyal to Corinne, scattered instantly. Caius was pure force, muscle, bone, and sharp, crushing teeth. He focused on the largest, tackling it with a thunderous impact that echoed through the trees. He didn't just fight. He commanded, using his alpha strength to intimidate and overwhelm. The tension broke with the sound of snapping bone. Meanwhile, Alara was a shadow, her movements silent, graceful, and devastatingly precise. She didn't engage the alpha directly. She used the environment, ducking under Caius's bulk, using his furious engagement as cover. She aimed for joints, for throats, using small, weighted stones and knives she'd scavenged. Caius pinned the first wolf, its whimpers of pain satisfying his primal fury. He glanced up, tracking the second scout. But then, the third scout, unseen, lunged at Orion's cave entrance. Elara! Caius roared, his voice more wolf than man. Elara intercepted the scout with a desperate, flying tackle. They tumbled into a thicket. With every heartbeat, Caius felt a terrifying double pull, the need to finish the scout beneath his paws, and the instinct to shield Elara. As the space between them burned, the fight intensified. Elara was pinned, fighting with desperate ferocity against the larger wolf. Caius, releasing the first scout, sprang toward them. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara let out a cry of pain and fear that reached Orion. Without warning, a beam of raw, chaotic golden energy erupted from the mouth of the cave. It wasn't a wolf shift, but a pure kinetic blast of kinfire. It struck the scout attacking Elara, throwing the rival wolf backward into a tree with devastating force. The scout collapsed, utterly neutralized. Silence. Caius stood over the downed scouts, his wolf form heaving, his fur slick with sweat and blood. He looked from the incapacitated scout to the small, whimpering Orion in the cave entrance, and finally to Elara, who was staring at the power she could not control. In the echo of his voice, the air settled. They had won, but at a cost. The rival pack knew exactly where the unstable power resided, and their escape was now cut off. Caius realized his attraction to Elara wasn't just old memory, it was the raw, undeniable respect for a woman who could fight and strategize, a woman whose fierce maternal will complemented his own savage defense.
He looked at the dead scouts.
By the time the pack dispersed, Caius noticed a small, silver insignia stitched onto the collar of the third scout, the one Orion had hit. It wasn't Corinne's standard emblem. It was a pack marking Caius thought was loyal to his territory. A question directed at the viewer/listener. What price does a leader pay when he trusts only his own control? Just like that, everything changed. The threat wasn't just external. The threat was rotten from the inside. They were trapped, and someone inside Caius's own circle had led Corinne straight to his son. Chapter 10. The Serpent in the Fold. As the echo faded, Caius stood over the single, captured scout, the one Orion's energy had stunned but not killed. Elara had retreated with Orion, leaving Caius to deal with a threat in the cold, hard way only an alpha could. Caius was still in his wolf form, the overwhelming scent of his predatory intensity filling the small space. He didn't need words. He pressed his massive muzzle close to the scout's terrified face, his growl a low, vibrating rumble that spoke volumes of punishment. He focused on the insignia he'd found, the silver knot of the Ashwood contingent. A pack segment swore allegiance to him, positioned deep within his western ranks. "Who sent you?" Caius's voice was a mental command, a brutal shove of alpha power directly into the scout's mind. The scout whimpered, resisting the mental intrusion. With every heartbeat, Caius intensified the pressure, because failure to extract this truth meant imminent destruction for his family. The overseer, the scout mentally shrieked. He told Corinne where the fire would first appear. He said it was an anomaly, a breach of the old pact. Caius recoiled slightly, the name hitting him like a physical blow. The overseer was his second in command, his most trusted advisor, the man he had relied on for tactical decisions for years. In fact, the overseer was the only other wolf who knew the ancient lore, the delicate, hidden treaty that bound the unique bloodlines to silence, the same lore Corinne was now exploiting. Cold fury, devastating in its intensity, washed over Caius. He had meticulously built his fortress on control and trust, only to find the serpent had been inside the walls all along. He realized his failure wasn't just letting Elara leave, it was relying too heavily on the structure he had built around himself, sacrificing vigilance for comfort. What did the overseer tell Corin about the boy? Caius demanded, his mind racing, trying to understand the depth of the treachery. He told him the truth, Alpha, about the ancient bloodline, how only a descendant of the Kinfire Weaver could control the power of the first shift. Without another word, Caius ended the interrogation.
He was compromised, exposed.
The betrayal was absolute, and it was rooted in the very history he had tried to suppress. The scout's body was quickly taken care of, its presence eliminated. Caius shifted back to human form, the familiar ache of transformation nothing compared to the acute professional failure searing his mind. He had to tell Alara the truth. His perfect world was a lie. Chapter 11. The Midpoint Revelation. Caius found Alara watching Orion sleep, her face soft in the dim light, the fire of her anger banked but not extinguished. Instead of beginning with strategy, he began with shame. The betrayal runs deeper than just an informant. Caius started, his voice rough. He sat heavily on a rock, suddenly feeling the weight of centuries of Alpha responsibility. The scout confirmed Corinne knows about the Kinfire Weaver bloodline, a secret only the most trusted know. Alara's eyes snapped to him.
How?
Despite that urge to lie and protect his pride, Caius forced the truth out. 10 years ago, right before you left, I signed a treaty with neighboring pacts, a treaty of neutrality. It was supposed to guarantee peace because the internal feuding was killing our numbers. The overseer wrote the documents. What followed was the confession of his deepest mistake. The treaty was meant to be purely territorial. But Corinne, through the overseer, managed to sneak a clause into the ancient lore registry, a clause that claimed the right of any Alpha to challenge a chaotic bloodline if it threatened the stability of the region. I missed it. I was so focused on the politics and the external threat, I missed the subtle internal manipulation. That's how Corinne is justifying his actions. He's using my sign mistake. Alara was silent for a long moment, not with anger, but with cold, devastating understanding. Her voice trembled as she processed the depth of his failure. So, you didn't just choose duty over me, Caius. You chose arrogance. You believed you were so secure, so smart, that you didn't read the fine print. And now your son is paying for your political mistake. As the truth unraveled, Caius nodded, accepting the brutal judgment.
Yes.
I chose my belief in my own control over everything else. The fight isn't just about protecting Orion anymore. It's about correcting my arrogance. I need to undo that treaty, because as long as it stands, Corinne can claim Orion as a threat. Just like that, everything changed. The dynamics shifted. Alara no longer saw a cold Alpha. She saw a flawed, shamed man whose actions had led them to this crucible. Caius reached inside his tunic and pulled out a small, obsidian wolf head, an ancient ceremonial artifact, the physical representation of the lore he had dismissed. He placed it carefully into Alara's palm. This is the Oathbreaker, he explained. It represents the core promise of that treaty. Corinne believes he needs this artifact to fully claim the Kinfire blood. I want you to study it. Find the loophole. You are a historian, Alara. I was just the politician. I am entrusting you with a piece of my power, my duty. In the quiet that followed, their hands brushed over the cold obsidian. It was a physical commitment, the first sign of true trust between them in a decade. Chapter 12. The Lure of Betrayal. The obsidian Oathbreaker artifact now rested securely in Alara's pack, but Caius had to act on the information from the captured scout. Meanwhile, he needed to confirm the Overseer's treachery without inciting a pack civil war. We need a sacrifice, Caius told Alara, his voice low and calculating as they stood near the Alpha Denver. The Overseer needs to know we suspect nothing. We lure him out before he can rally others. Instead of using his own trusted trackers, Caius used the small, loyal unit that was already on watch, positioning them discreetly. He broadcast a mental message across the core pack bond, loud enough for his overseer, wherever he was to hear. Urgent. I have tracked the boy and his mother. They are safe and under Alpha control. We will meet at the Great Falls at nightfall for a tactical briefing on the Corinne threat. Only the highest rank are required. That night, the Great Falls, a powerful, roaring symbol of Caius's strength, was dark and misty. Caius and Alara waited in the deep shadows, the artifact serving as their lure. With a single glance, Alara confirmed their positioning. She gripped a hidden hunting knife, her ferocity silent but potent. A figure emerged from the mist, tall, imposing, radiating the confidence of a seasoned lieutenant, the Overseer. Alpha. The Overseer greeted, his voice smooth, but Caius's heightened senses caught the subtle tremor of adrenaline beneath the feigned loyalty. I came as soon as I heard the news of your success. Where are the boy and the woman? They are where they need to be, Caius replied, his voice calm, betraying none of the cold fury that was a grinding stone in his gut. But before the briefing, I need to discuss the Treaty of Neutrality. I believe there was a mistake in the drafting. The change in the Overseer was instantaneous. His eyes, seconds ago warm with false loyalty, hardened into pinpoints of cold, reptilian calculation. There was no mistake, Alpha. Only necessary truth. As her wolf stirred, Alara sprang from the shadows, a silent streak of violence aimed at the Overseer's legs. The Overseer roared, shifting instantly, a massive, white-maned wolf, and countered her attack, proving his physical strength was as dangerous as his betrayal. Caius moved, fast, brutal, unforgiving. His alpha rage was focused entirely on this internal rot. He pinned the Overseer against a rock face, his teeth inches from the traitor's throat. You led Corinne to my son, Caius growled, the mental command a blinding bolt of pain. The Overseer laughed, a strangled, manic sound. He will save us from your weak rule, Caius. He will harness the kin fire for all of us. Before he could move, the Overseer used his white mane to his advantage, momentarily blinding Caius with a flurry of fur and a blast of suppressed energy. It was a perfect, calculated retreat. The traitor broke free and bolted, disappearing into the cover of the roaring water. They had cornered him, but they hadn't captured him. A beat later, Caius stood panting at the edge of the falls. Failure. The internal threat was not neutralized. It had escaped, armed with the knowledge that Caius knew everything. What's worse, a message was received. Not through the pack bond, but carried by a scorched, small owl that dropped dead at Caius's feet. The message, scrawled on parchment. The hunt begins. We meet at the weakest point. Corinne was massing his forces, preparing a full assault on the only place a young, powerful wolf would be protected, the very cave where Orion was hiding. The failure to capture the Overseer meant the antagonist was ready to move. Chapter 13. Finalizing the counterstrike. The raw, parchment threat from Corinne lay between Caius and Alara, a stark map of their impending doom. By the time the loyal scouts had returned from confirming Corinne's troop movements, the truth was undeniable. A direct defense of the cave was impossible. The Overseer had given Corinne the exact blueprint of Caius's standard defensive tactics. A defensive posture plays into his hand, Caius admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He was human, sitting across from Alara, sketching lines on the ground with a piece of charcoal. In the quiet that followed, he looked at the intricate, precise lines of his original plan, a strong defense that would lead to mass casualties. His strategy is based on predictable containment, Alara said, her eyes tracing the weak spots on the map. She tapped a location far from the cave, Corinne's known southern communication and resource cache. He expects you to defend Orion. We attack his infrastructure. We hit what he needs most, not what he wants most. Caius hesitated. Still, every instinct honed over a decade screamed against leaving their most precious asset exposed. Attack on the offense? It was reckless. If we leave Orion, even under the protection of the remaining loyalists. We don't leave him, Alara countered, cutting him off, her voice low and fierce. We leave him with the illusion of safety. We hit the cache because it forces Corinne to pull back key units, diverting resources away from the primary assault. It buys us time to truly hide Orion, or better yet, it throws Corinne into chaos. On the other hand, Caius realized the inherent flaw in his alpha training. It prized discipline over improvisation. He saw the fire in Alara's eyes, the maternal will driving her tactics. It was a chaotic, brilliant energy that perfectly countered Corinne's sterile, political approach. The plan is reckless, Caius finally stated, but there was a tremor of reluctant admiration in his voice. And utterly effective. We use stealth, not force. We destroy his communications, not his troops. As the truth unraveled, Caius felt a powerful internal shift. He trusted her. Not just functionally, but deeply, with the future of his pack. He had willingly relinquished the control that had been his defining principle. He reached out, his hand covering hers over the crude map. As the air thickened, their touch was not romantic. It was a shared commitment to violence and survival. It's your plan, Alara. We execute it your way. We will move tonight. Chapter 14. The Successful Strike. The mission was chaotic, organized by Alara's precise, fast-moving movements. That night, the attack on Corinne's resource cache was swift, brutal, and effective. Caius was a force of nature, protecting the perimeter while Alara and 3 loyal wolves, small, fast, and silent, infiltrated the old warehouse structure. He felt it, clear as day, the exhilaration of fighting alongside her, the seamless coordination of their contrasting styles. While she used silence and fire to ignite the oil drums, he used overwhelming power to neutralize the few guards before they could raise the alarm. In fact, Caius fought with an almost reckless abandon, utilizing the full, untamed power he usually suppressed. He wasn't fighting to defend, he was fighting to destroy. He took out 2 of Corinne's largest enforcers in a brutal 15-second span, relying on pure alpha dominance and speed. Because of that, his actions were noticed. What followed was the satisfaction of success. The cache erupted in a column of oily, black smoke that smeared the night sky. The strategic win was massive. But then, as Caius oversaw the retreat, a chilling presence pressed against his mind. It wasn't the pack bond. It was a cold, alien, powerful telepathic intrusion, Corinne's voice, sharp and precise, cutting through the smoke and the adrenaline. The voice was not loud, but it filled Caius's skull. You strike my supplies, little alpha? I expected defense. You sacrifice resources for your precious control. With every heartbeat, the taunt grew colder. You've proven 2 things, Caius. You have the will to fight, and you value the Oathbreaker more than you value your own power. Keep your precious kinfire close. I will take him and the woman, personally. Caius stumbled, the sudden mental taunt nearly bringing him to his knees. Corinne knew everything. He knew about Alara. He knew about the artifact. He was no longer a rival. He was a personal threat who was stalking his family. The success was costly, transforming the conflict from a territorial skirmish into a deadly, private vendetta. Chapter 15. The Retaliation. Caius and Alara made it back to the temporary holding area just before dawn. As the bond pulsed, Caius felt the frantic relief of the few loyal wolves guarding Orion. Alara rushed ahead, driven by the need to check on her son. Caius followed, his energy drained but focused. Without warning, the ground erupted. Corinne's retaliatory force, not wolves, but specialized mercenaries, quiet and armed, ambushed them immediately. The attack was surgical, designed to eliminate the leaders first. A projectile, metal, tipped with a shimmering, viscous substance, flew toward Alara. Her body moved on instinct, but she was too slow. Caius roared, a primal, shattering sound, and threw himself forward, shoving Alara to the side with a force that sent her skidding across the stone. The projectile hit him square in the chest. The pain was instantaneous, blinding, and overwhelming. It wasn't just physical trauma. The substance on the projectile was a powerful wolfsbane derivative, designed to suppress shifting, paralyze muscle, and obliterate alpha command. Caius collapsed, his massive body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. His vision swam. He tried to shift, to stand, to release an alpha command, and failed. His power was a thick, stagnant mire in his veins. The alpha was gone. Only a vulnerable man remained. He felt it, clear as day, the absolute dread of powerlessness. His strength, his control, the foundation of his entire identity, was stripped away. She didn't know what scared her more, the pain in Caius's eyes or the sight of the mercenaries closing in, expertly isolating Orion. Caius's last sight before the shadows closed in was the fierce, terrifying primal anguish on Alara's face as she scrambled back to her feet, knife in hand, preparing to fight a battle she could not win alone. He had protected them, but he had sacrificed his ability to save them. The point of no return had been crossed. Chapter 16. The Silent Despair. The paralyzing wolfsbane was a fire in Caius's veins, turning his muscles to lead and his power to dust. As the air thickened, he lay helpless, an immobile, agonizing witness to the unfolding disaster. Alara fought like a demon, a whirlwind of desperation and instinct, using speed and stealth against the heavily armed mercenaries. She didn't know what scared her more, the cold precision of Corinne's men or the knowledge that the man who could command this fight lay broken beside her. Meanwhile, the mercenaries expertly used the chaos to their advantage. They didn't engage Alara fully. They simply bypassed her, their focus singular and terrifying. Two large men cornered Orion near the cave entrance. The boy, traumatized and exhausted, tried to flare his kinfire one last time. A spark of volatile light emerged, but it was weak, easily suppressed by specialized tranquilizer nets. Caius watched, his throat raw, attempting to release a single, powerful alpha command, a primal, shattering roar that might save his son. He failed. Only a weak, pathetic wheeze escaped his lips. His voice trembled with impotent fury. He was forced to experience the failure of his control. The magnificent alpha was reduced to a paralyzed, screaming consciousness trapped inside a useless body. The mercenaries secured Orion, who was now unconscious and heartbreakingly still. But then Corinne appeared. He wasn't in wolf form. He was a tall, imposing man, impeccably dressed, walking into the cave like a political victor claiming his prize. He moved with the chilling confidence of a strategist who had just proven his superiority. Corinne stopped directly over the incapacitated Caius, his shadow falling across his face. The moment their eyes locked, Caius felt the rival alpha's cold satisfaction. "You should have stuck to defense, Caius," Corinne murmured, his voice laced with venom. "You sacrificed yourself for the woman and the child. Noble, but predictable. You are a good alpha, but a terrible father." Because of that cold taunt, Caius felt the utter collapse of his self-belief. His decade-old decision to let Alara leave, the sacrifice he had told himself was the ultimate act of duty, was now proven to be nothing more than a profound failure. His control hadn't protected them, it had made him blind. Just like that, everything changed. The mercenaries dragged Orion away. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Alara's ragged breathing as she watched the last piece of their shared future disappear. Chapter 17. The Dark Night of the Soul. Alara and the few remaining loyalists dragged Caius, still paralyzed, to a temporary, secure hiding spot. By the time they settled him, Caius was burning with fever, the wolfsbane poisoning raging through his massive frame. He slipped into a fever dream, and the cave walls melted away. He was back in his old den, 10 years ago. He saw Alara again, standing at the door, her meager bag packed. "If I stay," she had said, "you will always choose the pack's law over the boy's freedom. He deserves a chance to be safe, not a weapon." He remembered the primal urge to pull her back, to confess that he couldn't live without her, to admit that the thought of ruling alone, cold and absolute, was a fate worse than death. But he hadn't. He had let the fear take over. The fear of being weak, the fear of loving so fiercely that it might one day make him hesitate when a brutal command was necessary. He saw himself, 10 years ago, standing stoic and silent, his voice trapped. As the silence roared in his dream, Caius realized the truth. He hadn't let Alara walk away for duty. He had let her walk away for self-preservation. Isolation was not safety. It was self-punishment for his failure to trust his heart. He had feared his own weakness more than he had feared her leaving. With a single glance, The dream version of Alara faded, leaving Caius with a searing, awake reality. His flaw, his hubris of control, had directly led to his son's capture. Caius woke with a jolt, the pain of his injury a welcome distraction from the psychological torment. He was lucid now, the fog beginning to clear just enough. He saw Alara kneeling beside him, her face utterly broken, streaked with dirt and tear tracks, but her hands were moving, fast, efficiently, mixing a crude poultice of herbs and moss. She wasn't nurturing him. She was repairing a tool. In the quiet that followed, she looked up, her eyes empty but fixed. She was preparing to leave the sanctuary alone. He knew that look. It was the look of a wolf who had lost everything and was retreating into the brutal safety of isolation, the very flaw he had just confronted in himself. He had to stop her. Chapter 18. A Promise and a Plea. Alara finished wrapping the deep, poisoned wound on Caius's chest. Without another word, she began assembling a pack, minimal supplies, focusing on weaponry and fast travel. "You're running," Caius whispered, the word rasping in his throat. His voice was weak, but the underlying alpha command, the voice of absolute necessity, was still there. Alara paused, not looking at him. "I'm not running, Caius. I'm retrieving my son. Alone. Corinne wants the boy, and the alpha. I'm removing the alpha from the equation. It's the only way." "That is the path of isolation," Caius countered, fighting to keep his voice steady. "The path you took 10 years ago. It failed then, and it will fail now, because Corinne is expecting a lone, desperate mother. He's counting on you to abandon the alliance." As the truth unraveled, Alara finally turned, her face a mask of bitter determination. "And you, Alpha? You're telling me to trust your loyalists? The very people whose second-in-command betrayed us? Your strength is gone, Caius. I need speed and stealth, not a pack civil war." "My physical strength is gone, yes," Caius admitted, the confession a relief, tearing away the last veil of his self-delusion. "But my knowledge is not. And the pack is not broken. It is simply leaderless. They need a focus. They need a will. They need you." More importantly, Caius knew he had to empower her, not just command her. He had to give her a reason to rely on him again. He pulled her closer, his hand shaking with the effort, his eyes locking onto hers. Corinne is holding Orion in the ancient fortress at the center of his territory. There is only one weakness, a forgotten ventilation shaft only accessible through a tunnel that was blocked off after the first shift wars. He forced himself to recall the precise, obscure lore only the Alpha bloodline passed down. Because of that unique knowledge, he was still the key. "The entrance is disguised by a double-shift camouflage," Caius rasped, listing the obscure physical details, the moss texture, the specific stone orientation, that would lead her to the tunnel. "Only a weaver's touch can release the lock. You are a weaver, Alara. You can do this. You are not running alone. You are leading." With a single glance, he placed his final hopes in her hands. He wasn't giving her a plan. He was giving her back her identity and his trust. Alara stared at him, the despair receding, replaced by a cold, fierce resolve. She finally saw him, not the cold Alpha, but the desperate father who had sacrificed everything, including his pride, for his son. She nodded once, a gesture of grim acceptance. And just like that, everything changed. She was no longer a lone runner. She was the commander of his final push. Chapter 19. Passing the Torch. Come morning, the small band of loyalists, four-seasoned, grim-faced wolves who had evaded the overseer's treachery, gathered around Caius, their alpha, who lay immobilized. As the air thickened, Caius, propped up against the cold stone, used his mental telepathy, focusing his fading energy into his core loyalists. "The alpha cannot physically lead you," Caius mentally projected, his voice in their minds carrying the resonance of command, despite his physical state. "But the mission remains. You will follow Alara's lead." Confusion rippled through the loyalists. They had always followed the Alpha's strict, disciplined formation. "Alara is not pack rank, Alpha." One loyalist, a tracker named Lyra, mentally questioned. Hierarchy is irrelevant now, Caius insisted, pushing the truth into their collective minds. The enemy knows our rank structure. Alara knows Corinne's mindset, and she has an intuitive connection to the boy. You will ignore the pack hierarchy and trust her maternal will. In that moment, Caius willingly relinquished the defining principle of his life. He pushed Lyra and the others through a series of complex tactical scenarios, training maneuvers he couldn't physically perform but dictated through the pack bond. What followed was a dizzying simulation of stealth, evasion, and synchronized attack, all led by Alara's voice. Lyra, flank left. Use the scent block Alara prepared. No alpha presence, move as shadows, Caius commanded. Alara didn't use pack commands, she used simple, clear language. Lyra, you're too heavy. Be the wind. A beat later, Lyra executed the maneuver perfectly. Because of that successful action, a new confidence solidified among the loyalists. Caius watched, a profound sense of pride overriding the ache of the wolfsbane. He wasn't the controller anymore, he was the orchestrator. His strength hadn't vanished, it had transformed into the guidance he gave Alara. As the truth unraveled, Alara looked back at him, her eyes burning with resolve. The team is ready, Caius. Your trust is validated. Chapter 20, Final Plan Formulation. The fortress is Corinne's symbol of control. Thick walls, automated guards, Caius whispered, pointing to the crude map drawn on the stone floor, referencing the lore he had given Alara, Chapter 18. Alara traced the lines of the perimeter. We can breach the first 2 walls with the loyalists, but the center vault, where Corinne will keep Orion, is too secure. We need a synchronized distraction that can only come from the inside. Despite that risk, Caius agreed. The key is the Kinfire Weaver touch. Once you open the blocked tunnel entrance, you must reach the central structure. But you cannot fight Corinne alone. More importantly, Caius knew his final, crucial role. When you reach the inner core, I will use every ounce of remaining alpha power, not to command, but to call Orion. It will be agonizing, but it will force his unique power to flare, creating a diversion. It will break Corinne's focus. Alara's face paled. That will use the last of your energy, Caius. It could kill you. Then let it be, he stated, his resolve iron. The life I lost was the day I let you walk away, Alara. The life I save is the day I use my power for our son, not just for the pack. I need you to trust that I can push through the pain, because the risk is worth the redemption. As the silence stretched, Alara knelt beside him, her hand touching his poisoned chest. It wasn't a doctor's touch. It was the first real moment of intimacy since their reunion, a shared acceptance of the desperate risk. I need you alive, Caius, she murmured, her voice raw. Orion needs you. I need you to fight the wolfsbane. We will finish this together. In the echo of his voice, Caius gripped her hand, affirming his commitment. He forced himself to stand, pushing through the crippling paralysis with sheer willpower. The pain was blinding, causing him to lean heavily on the cave wall, but he remained upright. He felt it, clear as day. He was going to the fortress. He would not be left behind. Chapter 21, The Infiltration. The small unit moved under the cover of the blackest night, the silence broken only by the stealthy tread of Alara's loyalists. That night, the infiltration began. Caius, wrapped in furs and supported by 2 loyalists, was smuggled onto the mission. He was barely able to stand, but his mind was sharp, his senses honed to a needlepoint. Alara was the leader, silent, strategic, fierce. She moved with a confidence Caius hadn't seen since they were young fighters, relying on her maternal will to guide her through the shifting shadows. Meanwhile, Caius fulfilled his final role as Alpha, the scout. As the wind shifted, he used his senses to track the complex, overlapping patrols Corinne had established, directing Alara through the maze of guards before they were even visible. Correction. Patrol 5, 3 steps ahead. Lyra, divert them left now. Correction. Guard dog, scenting us. Alara, hold position until the wind changes. In fact, Elara trusted his directions implicitly, her body following his mental corrections without question. The seamless synchronicity of their minds was the most profound connection they had ever shared, a true functional bond forged in crisis. They reached the perimeter of the fortress. It was vast, formidable, and bristling with silent, unseen defenses. Without warning, a guard dog, larger than any Caius had ever seen, lunged from the shadows. Her body moved on instinct. Elara didn't hesitate. She met the attack head-on, disabling the dog with a precise, swift strike to its pressure points, silencing it instantly. She was brutal, fast, and focused. Caius watched, his chest swelling with fierce pride. She is ready. They had reached the forgotten section of the wall. Elara located the specific stone Caius had described, her fingers brushing the mossy surface. She inhaled deeply, preparing for the weaver's touch. Caius placed his hand on the cold stone, too. As the bond pulsed between them, a silent, final communion of strength, he felt the agonizing exhaustion of his final task looming. He knew the moment Elara activated the shaft, the fortress would know they were there. With a single glance, Elara began the ancient, intricate sequence. The stone shifted, grinding open a passage into the dark earth. Just like that, everything changed. The alarm had been triggered. They were inside, but the quiet was over. Caius prepared himself. The time for the final, desperate call was at hand. He had to breach the pain and force the flare of kinfire that would save his son. Chapter 22. The Climax of Control. They burst into the vault. In the span of a breath, the sight hit Caius like another wolfsbane dart. Corinne, towering and sneering, stood over Orion, who was strapped to a cold, metal table. The boy's kinfire was a chaotic, sputtering aura of unstable gold and red, threatening to tear him apart. Corinne wasn't trying to steal the power. He was trying to force it to destroy itself, demonstrating his final, cruel control over Caius's bloodline. Too late, Alpha, Corinne spat. The instability is terminal. Your son will vaporize himself and your pathetic sentimentality. Without thinking, Elara roared, not the deep growl of a wolf, but the primal, furious sound of a mother defending her cub. She launched herself at Corinne, a blur of motion and vengeance, armed with the Loyalists' hidden blades. Meanwhile, Caius, though still weak and leaning against the doorframe, focused his entire being on Orion. Pain was irrelevant. His survival was irrelevant. His goal was singular: transmit calm and stability to his son. He released his last reserves of alpha command, not as a shout of dominance, but as a silent, continuous wave of pure, absolute paternal love. Breathe, Orion. I'm here. We are safe. He didn't order the power to stop, he ordered it to be still. As the bond pulsed, a final, desperate connection between father and son, Caius felt the scorching, chaotic agony of the kinfire, but he met it with the cool, disciplined center of his soul. He fought against the poison in his blood, willing his power to heal and soothe, not command and control. Elara and Corinne were a whirlwind of focused violence. Corinne was stronger, but Elara was faster and fueled by maternal rage. With every heartbeat, Elara matched his brute force with cunning. She used the confines of the vault, drawing Corinne into a narrow choke point. Caius watched, his vision blurring, knowing this was it. He is choosing his family over duty's isolation. On the table, Orion's chaotic golden aura faltered, stabilized by Caius's desperate, loving transmission. The tension broke. Orion's eyes snapped open, no longer terrified, but lucid. He focused the gold light of his power, not into an explosion, but into a perfectly contained sphere of gentle light. He had achieved controlled power, saved by his father's vulnerability. Elara saw the change. In that momentary distraction, she executed the final strike. She didn't rely on strength. She relied on a precise, silent maneuver, disabling Corinne's knee and twisting his weapon arm. Corinne screamed, dropping his blade. The powerful Alpha was defeated by the synchronized force of the family he sought to destroy. Caius collapsed, his power utterly spent, but he was caught instantly by a triumphant Alara. The moment their eyes locked, it was no longer about conflict or blame. It was profound, shared relief. Chapter 23: The New Foundation. The fighting ceased immediately. As the air thickened, the Loyalists secured Corinne and managed the stunned, scattered enemy remnants. The chaos was over. Caius, supported by Alara, looked at Orion. The boy was small, exhausted, but alive. He felt it, clear as day, a love so pure it was almost painful. His survival wasn't about the power he wielded, it was about the power he shared. It was about trust. In the quiet that followed, Alara gently tended to the remaining wolfsbane wounds on Caius's chest. Their hands brushed again, and this time, there was no strategic necessity, only profound, shared relief. She didn't need to ask if he was okay. The exhaustion and the raw emotion in his eyes spoke volumes. The overseer? Caius rasped, needing to close the final political loop. Captured. Lyra secured him during the distraction. Alara confirmed, her voice low. The Loyalists stood firm, Caius. They followed my commands because they trusted you, trusted me. He didn't know what scared him more, the thought of losing them or the stunning realization that he had survived because he had abandoned control. Caius turned, leaning heavily on Alara, his gaze sweeping the ruined courtyard. He saw the Alpha banner, his symbol of absolute authority, lying torn on the ground. He didn't pick it up. Lyra, he commanded, his voice still weak, but carrying the weight of his rank. Secure the fortress. Begin the negotiations for Corinne's territory. You are the provisional Alpha. Without another word, Caius walked out of the ruins, choosing to leave the Alpha duty and its heavy political consequences behind. He leaned entirely on Alara, his strength now drawn from her. His personal barriers against vulnerability were utterly shattered. The isolated Alpha was gone. Chapter 24: The Integrated Life. Weeks later, Caius sat on the porch of the cabin, the sun warm on his face. He was fully recovered, but his days were no longer spent in the cold stone den. Instead, he was here, on the edge of the territory, embracing the life he had feared. By the time the pack had stabilized under Lyra's provisional rule, Caius and Alara had made a joint decision. They would rule their sector together, based in this neutral cabin, focused on the well-being and education of the younger generation. Lyra's doing well with the pack, Caius commented, looking at Alara, who was reviewing ancient lore texts at the small table. Her rule is collaborative, Alara, not isolated. She learned from your mistake, Caius. Alara smiled, without malice, only acceptance. The mistake wasn't in choosing duty, it was in believing that duty requires you to suffer alone. The pack needed a stable Alpha, but Orion needed two parents. As the truth unraveled, Caius realized his transformation was complete. He had transformed from the isolated Alpha to the integrated father/partner. Their relationship was no longer defined by old hurt, but by shared purpose. He watched Alara walk outside to join Orion. The boy was practicing his shift, but now, the gold light of his kinfire was steady, like a small, controlled furnace. And she let it happen, coaching him softly. Caius watched them, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, not the tight, disciplined smile of an Alpha, but the open, relaxed smile of a man who no longer feared the loss of control, but embraced the messy reality of love. Epilogue: The Legacy of Trust. 1 year later, the cabin had expanded, cozy and sturdy. Caius and Alara stood side by side, welcoming a small, young pack family into their territory. At the same time, Caius's tone was warm and collaborative, his authority stemming from respect, not fear. "Welcome," he said, gesturing toward the woods. "We protect our borders through transparency and unity, not secrecy. Our peace is your peace." Near the cabin, Orion, now 11 and taller, laughed. He proudly showed his younger sibling, a chubby, squealing infant held in Alara's arms, wrapped in a blanket, how to throw a soft, red ball. It was a simple, normal, safe family moment. Caius turned to Alara, their eyes meeting over the head of their new baby. The space between them burned with enduring, quiet passion. Their hands brushed, a simple, non-dramatic confirmation of their enduring, equal partnership. They had chosen love, and in doing so, they had saved not only their son, but their entire world.